when my son raised his voice and said, "If you can't let my wife have your room, then maybe you should find another place to live." Something inside me went very still. He didn't throw me out. Not exactly. But the way his words hung in the air, sharp, trembling, full of someone else's influence, made me realize I was no longer welcome in my own home. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat on the edge of my bed, looking around the room that had once been my sanctuary. The same cream-colored walls I'd painted when we first moved in, the same framed photo of my late husband smiling from the dresser, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I always kept near the window. Everything looked the same, but something had changed forever. My name is Margaret Lewis, and for most of my life, I believe that family was the one thing you could always depend on. I was 58 when my husband, Richard, passed away from a sudden heart attack. We'd been married for 35 years. Losing him was like losing the sound of my own breathing. For a long time, the house felt too big, too quiet. My only son, Ethan, had been my reason to get out of bed every morning after that. He was all I had left, the living piece of Richard that stayed behind. When he told me he was getting married, I was overjoyed. I remember baking his favorite lemon cake that day, even though my hand shook as I whisked the batter. He'd said, "Mom, you're gonna love her. Her name's Samantha. She's kind, thoughtful, a real family person." And in the beginning, I believed that. When Samantha first came into our lives, she was polite and gentle. She'd bring me little gifts, a potted plant, a box of tea, a scented candle. She called me Mrs. Lewis at first, but after the engagement, she started calling me Mom. She had a soft laugh and eyes that never stayed in one place too long, always scanning, observing, calculating. I didn't notice that then. I only noticed how happy she made my son. After the wedding, Ethan asked me if I'd be okay with them moving into the house for a while, just until they saved enough to buy their own. I said yes, of course. It's what mothers do. We make space. We adjust. We hope. So I gave them the guest room, a cozy space with light blue walls and a view of the garden. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. In the mornings, I'd hear their laughter from the kitchen. Samantha loved to cook elaborate breakfasts, pancakes, omelets, avocado toast, the kind of meals I never had time for when I was raising Ethan alone after his father died. She'd offer me a plate sometimes, though her tone always carried a polite distance. "Would you like some, Mom?" I'd smile and say yes, pretending not to notice when she set the plate down without looking at me. At first, it didn't bother me. I told myself she was adjusting, learning, finding her rhythm as a wife. But soon, small things began to shift. Quiet, almost invisible changes that only someone who'd built that home from the ground up could feel. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found my favorite quilt folded in the hallway, the one my mother had sewn for me when I was 19. It used to hang across my bed, a patchwork of faded roses and warm reds. "Why's this out here?" I asked, confused. Samantha appeared from the bedroom, her tone light, almost cheerful. "Oh, I thought it would look nicer in storage." "I'm trying to give the house a fresher look." I blinked. "A fresher look?" "Yeah," she said, smiling. "You know, more modern. Cleaner lines, lighter colors. I thought Ethan's room could use a bit of an update too." Ethan's room, that's what she called it, not your son's room or the guest room. It was Ethan's room now. It took me a moment to realize she meant my room, my bedroom. I felt a small chill then, one that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A few days later, Ethan came home late from work, looking tired. I made him a cup of tea and we sat in the living room like we used to, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the pauses in our conversation. He looked uneasy. "Mom, Sam's been feeling uncomfortable lately." "Uncomfortable?" I repeated. Yeah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. She says it's hard for her to relax when she doesn't feel like she has her own space. The guest room feels temporary. She wants to feel more settled. I nodded slowly. I understand that. But what does that have to do with... He hesitated. She was thinking maybe you could move into the smaller room. Just until we buy a place, the smaller room. The one I used for storage. The one with no windows and a single creaking floorboard. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just looked at my son. My kind, funny boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard and say, "These are for you, Mom. You're the prettiest flower I know." Now here he was, sitting across from me, asking me to give up the one space that still felt like mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house in the dark, running my hand over the furniture I'd bought with Richard. Every corner carried a memory. The faint scratch on the dining table where Ethan once carved his initials, the mark on the wall from when we moved the piano, the smell of cinnamon that lingered in the kitchen from years of Sunday baking. Everything here was built on love, on family, on sacrifice. And now I was being asked to make room for someone who couldn't even make room in her heart. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Let me think about it." But deep down, I already knew what I would do, because sometimes leaving quietly is the loudest thing a mother can do. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, slicing across the countertop where Samantha was already standing, phone in hand, scrolling through something. She looked immaculate, her hair tied neatly, a soft cream blouse, gold hoops glinting when she turned her head. "Morning," I said, reaching for the kettle. She smiled too quickly. "Morning, Mom." I made coffee. It was the same tone she used with delivery people and cashiers. Polite, distant, coated in sugar but empty inside. I poured myself a cup anyway. The coffee was too strong, the kind that left a bitter taste long after the first sip. Ethan walked in moments later, kissing her cheek before heading to the fridge. "Morning, babe," he said. His voice was light, easy, but I caught the flicker in Samantha's eyes, the look that said something silent had already been exchanged between them before I entered the room. "Mom," Ethan said, glancing my way, "Sam and I are thinking of redecorating the living room this weekend. Maybe get rid of that big brown couch? It's a bit old-fashioned." I froze mid-sip. That couch had been with me for 20 years. Richard and I bought it the week Ethan started kindergarten. I still remembered him jumping on it, laughing so hard I had to pretend to scold him. "Old-fashioned?" I repeated quietly. Samantha laughed softly, brushing her hair back. "It's just bulky. You know how modern spaces need air and light. We're not saying throw it away. Maybe move it to the basement for now." I smiled faintly, though something inside me began to tighten. I see. But that was the first sign, the first quiet push to erase the life I'd built before she arrived. Over the next few weeks, the changes multiplied. One by one, little things started disappearing. The crocheted throw blanket from the armchair, the ceramic vase Richard gave me for our 25th anniversary, even the family portraits that once lined the hallway, replaced by new ones of Ethan and Samantha smiling at beach resorts and dinner parties. I told myself not to read too much into it. "She's just trying to make it feel like home," I said in the mirror one night as I brushed my hair. But the reflection that stared back didn't believe it. It wasn't just the house that was changing. It was Ethan. He used to stop by my room every night before bed just to ask how my day was. We'd talk about work, about the weather, about nothing at all. But lately, the sound of his footsteps stopped outside my door, hesitated and turned away. When I asked if everything was all right, he'd smile and say, "Of course, Mom. Don't worry so much. but his eyes didn't match his words anymore. One Sunday afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen. I was watering the plants by the doorway when their voices rose. "She makes me feel like a guest in my own house," Samantha said sharply. "She's my mother," Ethan replied. His tone was low, tired. "She's been through a lot, Sam. Just try to—" "I am trying," she snapped. "But she's everywhere, Ethan. Every corner of this place has her in it. I can't breathe without feeling like she's watching me." I froze, my hand trembling over the watering can. There was a long silence before Ethan spoke again. "You're overthinking this." "I'm not," she said. "And if you can't see how it's affecting us, then maybe we need to make a change." I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding. A change. I didn't know what kind of change she meant then. But I would soon. That evening, I cooked dinner. Roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, and green beans sautéed in butter. It was Ethan's favorite. When I called them to the table, Samantha came out first, glancing at the food with a faint smile. "This looks wonderful, Mom," she said, sitting down. Ethan followed, looking distracted, scrolling through his phone. We ate mostly in silence, the clink of cutlery louder than any conversation. Halfway through the meal, Samantha set her fork down. "Ethan," she said softly, "have you talked to your mom yet?" I looked up, confused. He exhaled slowly. "Sam." "What's going on?" I asked. He glanced at her, then back at me. "Mom, Sam and I think it's time we start having our own space." As a couple, I blinked. "You mean you're ready to move out?" Samantha shook her head gently. No, not that. It's just, I've been having trouble sleeping. The guest room feels cramped. It's right next to the laundry room. It's noisy. I was wondering if maybe you could let us use your room instead." The words hit me like a slow, spreading cold. "My room," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's bigger," she said quickly. "It has better light, a softer mattress, a better view. And you could move into the smaller room, just for a while. The smaller room, the one with the flickering bulb and no closet." I looked at Ethan, hoping he'd step in, laugh, tell her it was ridiculous. But he didn't. He just looked down at his plate. I realized then that he'd already agreed. Something deep inside me broke, quietly, cleanly, like glass underfoot. That night, I sat in bed for hours, staring at the half-empty closet. My husband's shirts still hung there, their faint scent of cedar and aftershave long faded. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for this family, how I'd worked 2 jobs after Richard died just to keep this house, how every corner of it carried my fingerprints, and my love. Now, suddenly, I was being asked to shrink my life into a smaller room, to make myself small enough to fit someone else's comfort. And the worst part wasn't Samantha's request. It was Ethan's silence. That was when I knew. It was time to leave. I didn't leave in anger. There were no slammed doors, no final outburst, only quiet. The kind that lingers in the air long after words have stopped. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, and folded the last of my clothes into a small suitcase. I moved slowly, methodically, like someone wrapping up a chapter of their life sentence. I wrote a short note and left it on the dresser. "Don't worry about me. I'll stay with Linda for a while. Take care of each other. Linda was my sister. She lived 20 minutes away in a smaller but warmer home, the kind that smelled of lavender and baked bread." When I quietly wheeled my suitcase down the hall, the house was asleep. Ethan's door was closed. Samantha's soft laughter trickled from inside, followed by the glow of her phone screen. They didn't even notice me leave. Linda opened the door in her robe, eyes widening in surprise. "Margaret? What on earth? It's midnight. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. I just need a place to stay for a bit. She didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and said, "You can have the guest room." When I lay down in her bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: emptiness, but also, strangely, peace. The first few days passed in a haze. Linda made me tea every morning. We talked about nothing: the weather, her garden, the neighbor's noisy dog. She didn't pry, though her eyes asked all the questions her lips didn't. By the end of the first week, Ethan finally called. "Mom? Where are you?" "At your aunt's," I said softly. There was a pause, the kind filled with unsaid things. "You didn't have to just leave." "I didn't want to make you uncomfortable," I replied. "You and Samantha need your space. Now you have it." "Mom, it's not—" I heard Samantha's voice in the background. "Ask her if she took her things from the bathroom. I can't find my face cream." Ethan sighed. "Look, Mom, can we talk later? I'll come by." But he didn't come by. Not that day, not the next. Weeks passed, and with distance came clarity. Linda's house was quiet, filled with the kind of stillness that healed instead of hurt. I spent my mornings watering her plants, my afternoons reading on the porch, and my evenings helping her with dinner. But every so often, when my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, my heart still jumped. At first, his texts were short. "Hey, Mom, how are you? Everything good over there?" But soon, they changed. "Sam's been acting weird lately. We've been arguing a lot. Over small things, the house feels empty." I didn't respond right away. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to drive back, fix everything, smooth things over like I always had. But something in me whispered, "Wait." One Saturday afternoon, Linda and I were sitting on her porch when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Ethan stepped out. He looked tired, older somehow, like the world had suddenly become too heavy for him to carry. "Mom," he said quietly. "Ethan?" He stood there for a moment, hands shoved in his pockets. "Can we talk?" Linda excused herself, giving us the space we needed. He sat across from me, staring at the floorboards. "Things have been hard," he said finally. "Sam and I can't seem to agree on anything. She's angry all the time. I don't even know what about anymore." I folded my hands in my lap. "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked up sharply. "You sound like you don't care." I took a deep breath. "I care deeply, Ethan. But caring doesn't mean fixing everything for you anymore." He blinked, surprised. "For years," I continued, "I held that house together. Every time you two argued, I'd be the one to calm things down. Every awkward silence, I filled it with warmth. Every wound, I tried to heal quietly. You never saw it, but I was the glue." He looked away, shame clouding his face. "Now that I'm gone," I said softly, "you can finally see the cracks for what they are." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know you didn't," I said, "but you did. And you need to understand why, later that evening after he left, I sat alone on the porch with my cup of tea. The sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the cicadas hummed their endless song. I thought about my life in that house, the laughter, the arguments, the dinners, the quiet nights alone after Richard died. Every memory clung to that place like dust in sunlight. And yet, I didn't miss it anymore. For the first time in years, I could breathe. 2 weeks later, I received another call. It was Samantha this time. Her voice was trembling. "Margaret, I think I owe you an apology." I sat up straighter. "Oh?" She hesitated, then said, "I didn't realize how much you did for us until you left. Ethan and we can't seem to find peace anymore. The house feels cold. Everything's messy, tense. I thought it was you who made things difficult, but it was you who made things work. Her words were raw, unpolished, and for the first time, honest. I said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "That house doesn't need redecorating, Samantha. It needs respect." She sniffled on the other end. "Please, could you come back? Just for a little while? We'll make space. You can have your room back." Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around Linda's cozy home. The plants on the sill, the soft ticking of the clock, the scent of soup simmering from the kitchen. I realized something profound then. I didn't need to go back to have peace. I could choose where and how I existed now, not as a background character in someone else's life, but as the author of my own. Still, I agreed to visit, not as a mother desperate for belonging, but as a woman who had finally found her worth. When I finally decided to go back to that house, I didn't pack much, just an overnight bag and a calm heart. Linda asked gently, "You sure you're ready for this?" I smiled faintly. "I'm not going back to stay, Linda. I'm going back to be heard." She nodded, understanding without needing more words. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, but it felt different. The curtains I had washed countless times were now drawn unevenly. The porch plants had withered, their leaves dry and gray. The front step still bore that small crack Ethan promised to fix months ago. It struck me then. I had been the quiet caretaker of everything, from the smallest plant to the biggest emotion. Without me, things fell apart. I rang the bell. Samantha opened the door. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. She'd been crying. "Margaret," she breathed, stepping aside. "Please come in." The house smelled faintly of burnt food and stale air. The once bright living room looked cluttered, almost suffocating. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with guilt. I gave a small nod. "Ethan." For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy, uncomfortable, but necessary. Then Samantha broke it. "I know I treated you terribly," she said. "I thought I was standing up for myself, but I was just being selfish. I thought this house needed me to change it. I didn't see how much it already had because of you." Her words were shaky, but sincere. I took a deep breath and looked around the room, at the disarray, the exhaustion in their faces. "I didn't come back to blame anyone," I said softly, "but if I'm going to be here, things will be different." Ethan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, setting my bag down, "I will not be treated like a guest in my own family. If I cook, I do it because I want to, not because it's expected. I'll help, but I won't fix your arguments. I'll listen, but I won't take sides. And above all, I will have my own room." There was a long silence. Samantha's eyes filled again and she nodded slowly. "Of course," she whispered. "You deserve that." Ethan reached out, his voice cracking. "Mom, I'm so sorry for shouting at you, for forgetting what you mean to this family." I took his hand, my son's hand, that I once held when he was a boy afraid of the dark. "It's all right, Ethan," I said gently, "but don't say sorry to make me stay. Say sorry because you understand." He nodded, eyes glistening. That evening, as I sat in my old room, my room again, I looked around quietly. The same floral curtains hung by the window. My framed family photo still stood on the dresser. Dust had gathered on the corners, like time had been waiting for me to return. I wiped the photo gently, smiling faintly at the image. Ethan, Samantha, and me. We looked happy then, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad looking at it. I felt grateful, because now I knew that happiness isn't about keeping everyone together. It's about knowing when to let go and when to walk back on your own terms. Over the next few weeks, the house changed again, but this time not because of my endless effort, because they began to see. Samantha started cooking dinners and inviting me to sit at the table with her, asking for advice rather than demanding obedience. Ethan made repairs around the house, the porch, the faucet, the broken picture frame, not because I reminded him, but because he wanted to make things right. And for once, I let them. I didn't jump in to fix what was broken. I let them learn the weight of their own responsibilities. It wasn't revenge, it was balance. One night, as we finished dinner together, Ethan looked at me with a small smile. "The house feels like home again," he said. I smiled back. "That's because it finally is a home, not a battlefield." Samantha reached across the table, touching my hand gently. "Thank you for coming back, Margaret. You didn't have to, but you did, and we needed that." I squeezed her hand softly. "Sometimes," I said, "life doesn't need another fight to fix what's wrong. It needs a little distance and a lot of honesty." After dinner, I stepped out onto the porch with my cup of tea. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet grass. From inside, I could hear laughter, light, real, unforced. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was peaceful. I thought of Linda and made a note to visit her soon. She'd want to know how it all went. I'd tell her that everything was different now. Not magically healed, but better. Because sometimes the lesson isn't about being right. It's about being respected. And that, finally, I was. A few days after I returned, word spread quietly through our small suburban street, as it always does. In communities like ours, people notice everything. Who parks where, whose trash bins are left out too long, who suddenly disappears, and who comes back. When I stepped outside to fetch the morning mail, I saw Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor, standing by her fence with that familiar mix of curiosity and concern. "Margaret," she called out, her voice half whisper, half gossip. "You're back, dear." I smiled, holding my mug of tea. "Just settling back in." Her eyes flicked toward the house. "Everything all right now?" I gave her a calm, practiced smile, the kind that ends conversations gently. "It will be." She nodded, satisfied, though I could already imagine her retelling the scene over her garden hedge to the Johnsons by noon. But that was fine. Let them talk. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. That Sunday, Ethan insisted we go to church together. It had been a long time since we'd attended as a family. The three of us sitting side by side in the same pew. As we entered, I could feel eyes following us, polite nods exchanged, whispers half hidden behind hymn books. Reverend Clark smiled kindly from the altar. "Good to see you again, Margaret." "Good to be here," I said, meaning it. After the service, several old friends approached, some with genuine warmth, others with that subtle curiosity people reserve for those who've survived something they can't quite name. "How are things with Ethan and Samantha?" Mrs. Carter asked, her tone dripping with polite interest. "Peaceful," I said simply. "We're learning from each other now." The simplicity of my answer left her momentarily disarmed. Sometimes dignity confuses those who expect drama. Back at home, something had shifted. People stopped avoiding us. Neighbors began dropping by again, bringing pies, asking about garden tools, talking about the weather instead of whispering about our family. Samantha, surprisingly, handled it with grace. When a neighbor complimented her on how well she kept the house, she smiled and said, "Margaret taught me everything." It was a small sentence, but it carried the weight of all her unspoken apologies. Later that evening, I found her in the kitchen, drying dishes. She turned to me and said softly, "You know, I didn't realize how much work goes into making a home feel safe. I used to think it just happened." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't just happen, dear. It's built. One act of patience at a time." She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us that didn't need more words, but there was still one more ripple left to face. Ethan's father's side of the family. Richard's sister, Aunt Helen, called that week. She'd heard the entire story, though, as always, slightly exaggerated. "Margaret, sweetheart, I heard you left the house," she exclaimed over the phone. "What on earth happened?" "Did Ethan really ask you to move out?" I hesitated for a moment, then chose honesty. Gentle, not defensive. "Yes, Helen, he did, but he's learned his lesson and we're finding peace now." Helen tisked on the other end. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day. You raised that boy right. What got into him?" "Love," I said softly, "and confusion. The two often come together." She went quiet, then sighed. "You've always been too forgiving, Margaret." "Maybe," I replied, smiling to myself, "but forgiveness keeps me from turning bitter." By the time Thanksgiving arrived, the air between us all had softened, like a wound that finally stopped throbbing. We invited Linda and her husband over that evening. She hugged me tight at the door and whispered, "You look peaceful." "Happier." "I am," I said. "It's quieter now, inside and out." At dinner, Samantha served dishes she'd made herself. Roast chicken, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce. She'd spent all day cooking, determined to show effort rather than perfection. As we sat around the table, Ethan lifted his glass. "To family," he said, "to mistakes that teach us, and to the woman who held us together, even when we didn't deserve it." His voice broke slightly at the end. Everyone turned to look at me. For a moment, the years of pain, distance, and silence melted into something simpler. Gratitude. I raised my own glass to learning when to let go and when to come home. After dinner, as everyone moved into the living room, Linda leaned close and murmured, "You did it, Margaret. You took back your peace without losing your heart." I smiled softly. "Peace isn't something you take, Linda. It's something you choose over and over again." From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan laughing with Samantha, their shoulders touching, the tension between them finally replaced by something real. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was honest. And in honesty, there is healing. Later that night, as I sat by my bedroom window, the house quiet around me, I looked out at the neighborhood. Porch lights flickering, the sound of a distant dog barking, the wind brushing gently through the trees. Life was still messy, still unpredictable, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. Because this time, I wasn't living to keep the peace. I was the peace. The days after Thanksgiving felt different. The house breathed again, slower, softer, like it had been holding its breath for months and finally exhaled. I woke up early one morning to the faint sound of rain against the window. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the hallway, and for once, it wasn't mine. I walked to the kitchen and found Samantha there, still in her robe, pouring 2 mugs. "Oh, good morning," she said, a little startled. "I thought I'd surprise you." Ethan's still asleep. She offered me a cup, smiling shyly. "I finally figured out how you like it. 1 spoon of sugar, no cream." I took the cup, warmth spreading through my palms. "You remembered." She shrugged, blushing a little. "I pay attention now." For a moment, we stood in comfortable silence, listening to the rain. It was the kind of silence I used to crave, not the heavy kind filled with unspoken words, but the peaceful kind that only comes after forgiveness. That afternoon, Ethan joined me on the porch while I tended to the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago had survived despite neglect. A few dry leaves clung to the stems, but beneath them, new buds were forming, small stubborn signs of life. Ethan crouched beside me, helping clear the soil. "You were right about the fertilizer," he said. "Sam swore the plants were dead, but look at them. They just needed time," I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked. "I guess we did too." There was a pause and his voice grew softer. "I still think about that day, Mom. The way I shouted at you. I don't know what came over me. I didn't look up from the soil. You were caught between love and pride," I said. "Both can make people blind." "I hurt you," he whispered. "Yes," I said simply, "but you also learned." "That matters more." He nodded, his eyes wet. "You didn't deserve what I said." I finally looked at him and smiled gently, then make sure no one else ever does. He reached over, squeezed my hand, and for the first time since that awful day, I felt the boy I raised, kind, humble, good-hearted, peek through the man he'd become. Weeks passed. Life found its rhythm again, not through routine, but through quiet understanding. Samantha started a small online business, handmade candles she poured herself. I helped her design the labels. She said my handwriting looked classic. I laughed. "That's just old age, dear." Ethan started fixing the little things I used to nag him about. The squeaky door hinge, the uneven step, the leaky faucet. I didn't have to remind him anymore. He just did it. We had finally learned how to live together without stepping on each other's peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a soft golden light through the living room, I found myself sitting by the window with a book I'd read a dozen times before. Samantha came in quietly and sat across from me. "Margaret," she said, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I first moved in, I thought you were judging me. I felt small around you, like I could never live up to what you built." I closed the book gently. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I realize you weren't judging me. You were just steady, and I wasn't used to that. I grew up in chaos, so calm felt like control to me." Her honesty caught me off guard, but it was the kind of truth that heals, not hurts. I reached out, took her hand, and said, "Then maybe we both learned something. You learned calm isn't control, and I learned letting go isn't the same as giving up." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not walking away forever." "I almost did," I admitted, "but I realized some homes are worth walking back into when the people inside are ready to meet you halfway." That night, I sat in my room, looking at an old photograph of Richard holding a young Ethan in his arms. I whispered quietly, "You'd be proud of him now." The house was peaceful. No shouting, no slam doors, no heavy silence, just the hum of the night and the sound of gentle laughter drifting from the living room. I thought about everything that had happened, how quickly love can turn to pride, and how pride can crumble under the weight of guilt. But I also thought about forgiveness, how it doesn't erase pain, but transforms it into something that teaches us who we really are. That weekend, I visited Linda again. We sat on her porch swing, sipping lemonade. "So," she said, her eyes twinkling, "how does it feel to be queen of your own house again?" I laughed softly. "It's not about being queen. It's about knowing my place and making sure others do too." She grinned. "You sound lighter." "I am," I said, gazing out at the trees. "I stopped trying to be everything for everyone. Now I'm just me." Linda raised her glass. "To peace. To boundaries," I added, smiling, "the kind that protect love instead of breaking it." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like my story had come full circle. It's been almost a year since that day. The day my own son's voice, sharp with anger, split through the walls of the home I built with my hands and my heart. Sometimes, when I walk through those same halls now, I still hear echoes of that night. Not in a painful way, but as a quiet reminder of how fragile love can be when pride walks in. The house feels different, yet familiar. The same walls, the same sunlight spilling across the floor in the mornings, but the air holds peace instead of tension. I've learned something. Homes don't stay broken because of fights. They stay broken when no one learns from them, and in our case, we all did. There's a photo that hangs in the hallway now. One Samantha had framed. It's from last month's family dinner. Ethan is holding her hand and I'm sitting beside them, laughing at something Linda said. It's not a perfect picture. The lighting's uneven. My glasses are slipping down my nose. But when I look at it, I see growth. Not perfection, not pretending. Just people trying, forgiving, learning. Sometimes that's enough. I think often about that word, forgiveness. People say it's a gift you give others. Maybe that's true. But I've realized it's mostly a gift you give yourself. Forgiving Ethan didn't erase what he said. It didn't undo the nights I cried, wondering where I went wrong as a mother. But it freed me from carrying the weight of that moment. It allowed me to love him again, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he's become. And Samantha, I forgave her too, in my own quiet way. She never truly asked for it, but she earned it. Through small acts, through patience, through finally seeing me as something other than an obstacle. Now, when the evenings turn soft and the light fades from the porch, I sit with my cup of tea and think about all the women like me. Mothers who gave their children everything, only to one day hear, "Get out." To you, I want to say this. You are not defined by the way they failed to see your worth. You are defined by the way you carry yourself after. Don't shrink yourself just to fit back into a place that used to feel like home. Sometimes stepping away isn't walking out. It's walking toward yourself. I left my house once, yes, but when I came back, I wasn't the same woman who left. I came back with boundaries, with grace, and with the quiet strength of someone who knows her own value. If you ever find yourself standing at the door, suitcase in hand, heartbreaking, unsure whether to go or stay, I want you to remember this. Leaving doesn't make you weak. Silence doesn't mean defeat. And forgiveness doesn't make you foolish. Sometimes it's just the bravest way to move forward. Last week, Ethan brought me a small box. Inside was a key, my old house key, polished and tied with a red ribbon. He said, "You don't need it to come in, Mom. But I wanted you to know this will always be yours, too." I didn't cry, not then. I just smiled and held his hand, because that's what healing looks like. Not grand gestures or perfect apologies, but quiet understanding. Now, when I close my eyes, I see that night. The shouting, the heartbreak, the moment I walked away. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a chapter. And every chapter, no matter how painful, belongs in the story that made me who I am. So to anyone listening, if you've ever been pushed out of a space you built with love, whether that's a home, a relationship, or someone's heart, don't lose yourself trying to get back in. Sometimes you have to leave so they can realize what your presence truly meant. And when you return, do it with your head high, your heart open, and your peace unshaken. Because real strength isn't in holding on, it's in knowing when to let go and when to walk back with grace. Soft piano fades in, Her voice lowers. This was my story, of losing a home and finding my peace again. If it touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth today. Pause. And tell me, if you were me, would you have walked away or stayed to fight for the home you built?